Chess Tisher, what are you doing here with this festive backdrop and this beautiful competition chess set? With this sunlight streaming in, it actually makes me want to sit down here with you and play a game. The idea is that today, I'm not bringing you just any video, but one of the games that has helped me grow the most, one that has really left a mark on my chess career. Honestly, I used to be a very materialistic player. Do you know what a materialistic player is? That player who's afraid to lose a pawn just to avoid having to play the whole game a pawn down, let alone sacrificing a knight or anything like that, which nowadays seems so normal in videos, right? But in reality, it's not normal at all. And that led me to where I am today, which is really a style of chess I love, a dynamic kind of chess and all that, right? So the game I'm bringing you today is one of those that really made something click for me. And we're going to look at it from the perspective of a world championship chess game, you know that. These are the kinds of chess games that were played and are still played in world championships. The game was played by the five-time world champion from India, Vishwanathan Anand, who is without a doubt one of my favorite players. He's brilliant. And you'll see how this game is no exception. Far from it. It's actually one of his best games. The idea, and the luck I have, so to speak, is that since I have so many followers, I'm aware I'm not the one with the most followers in the world, but if we look at it logically, we know there are a lot of us. I can give an objective opinion about the best and worst chess sets. We're really lucky that a lot of chess brands reach out to us, so we can turn some down and bring others onto the channel. And without a doubt, I stick with this chess brand, which is the one I always use for my purchases, which is chessies.ar. Honestly, the service is amazing, and the chess sets are even better. That's why I convinced them to have the discount code CHESSTEACHER in their store, so you, my followers, can benefit from it and get your chess set with a 15% discount. So if you want, I'll leave it right here below in the description. You can get any chess set you like with a 15% discount if you use the discount code CHESSTEACHER. But look, what really matters to me is the video, so let's check out this amazing game, Chess Teacher, because if it made something click in your head, it will probably do the same for me. The black pieces played a Caro-Kann defense, which really, if we look at the first moves, most of you are probably thinking, how can such a brilliant and dynamic game, like the one I'm telling you about, start with a Caro-Kann defense, which is known for being perhaps the most solid defense in all of chess? Well, that's right, appearances can be deceiving, my friends. D4, you already know that whenever you don't control the center, you should try to do so with your pawns. D5, and here we see perhaps the main line against the Caro-Kann, which is this knight to C3. The game continued with pawn takes pawn and knight takes pawn, the main line, and then knight to D7. Be careful here because there are quite a few traps that the most loyal followers of the channel probably know, with the tricky move queen to E2. And if black now plays the normal knight to f6, simply knight to d6 would be checkmate, taking advantage of the fact that this pawn is completely pinned by our queen. That's why this sneaky queen to e2 is very useful for online games. However, logically, there are many moves that stop this checkmate. And that's why Viswanathan chose a move that is also, watch out, a bit sneaky, but not as much as queen to e2. The move is knight to g5. What an interesting move, right? It might really seem like this knight can just be chased away with the pawn, and in fact you can do that, but you could end up in lines with knight takes f7, those typical sacrifices we've seen on the channel, which are pretty dangerous for black. That's why the player with the black pieces simply went for this calmer move here, knight to f6. Bishop to d3, developing the bishop. The idea is that with this bishop, you control the e4 square, and if at some point they try to chase away this knight with the move h6, this knight could simply be relocated to the e4 square, where it would be perfectly placed. The game continued with e6, allowing the development of the dark-squared bishop. The thing is, it's true that this move leaves the light-squared bishop pretty boxed in back here, right? Because it can't get through. Not to the right or to the left, because there are pieces and pawns blocking it. Pros and cons. Knight to f3. As I was saying, don't worry about this knight, because we don't want to move it back to a3. Instead, whenever h6 is played, we want to bring it back to the e4 square. bishop to d6, and now queen to e2, keeping open the option to castle short or long. This is a great idea because depending on what our opponent does, we can castle to either side. And now, after this h6 attacking the knight simply goes back to e4 without any problem. Knight takes. Here, we could recapture with either the bishop or the queen, but it's just a bit more precise to recapture with the queen. Even though we're putting the queen in a pretty exposed position, we're creating a very strong threat. Black can't castle, because queen to h7 would simply be checkmate. So with this queen on e4, we're preventing black from castling. If at any point, for example, they play knight to f6 attacking the queen, well, we'll simply move the queen back. If we had placed the bishop, we would also have to move the bishop after a knight to f6 so as not to lose this strong pair of bishops we have. So in this kind of position, it's perfectly fine to recapture with the queen. Queen to c7, short castles. So far, the game is making perfect sense, right? Black still can't castle because there's the move queen to h7, checkmate. So before they can castle, they'll have to play knight to f6. g6, trying to solve the problem. Sorry, b6, trying to solve one of the biggest problems black has right now, which is this light squared bishop. You know, I always tell you that when you look at a position, you should talk to all your pieces, because sometimes there are pieces that just aren't comfortable at all. In this case, this bishop would probably be exactly the same here as it is here. Do you see it? It's absolutely doing nothing. Therefore, this move, b6, allows you to develop in the short term. The bishop to b7 and onto a long diagonal, actually the longest one on the board. The game continues with queen to g4, a very interesting move because it directly targets this g7 square. Now, many of you might be thinking, well, black just castles and that's it. But that would be a huge mistake, because then comes bishop takes h6, and as you can see, the pawn falls in a completely forced way. And not only that, but now the only way to stop checkmate would be to give up the exchange for the bishop. So, well, before things get out of hand, the only way to stop this queen to g4 is by advancing this pawn. Could it also be stopped with the rook? Well, be careful, because here we would be threatening the rook, then we'd come in with the queen, and that would be dangerous. So black, in this position after queen to g4, chooses to play g5, which is the best move. But of course, it's already clear that black's pieces are getting really weak, right? And this is where Anand manages to really finish the game in a brilliant way. Like I said, black isn't weakening because they want to, but because Anand is forcing them to. The queen retreats. We always have to be careful with these kinds of advances, which are called forks, heel hooks, or whatever you want to call them. Right now, advancing would not be possible because it is defended by the queen, but if at some point, for example, black plays rook to g8, then it would become a completely logical threat. In fact, here black plays rook to g8, and so here, surely many of you were thinking, well, obviously white should try to prevent the threat. But you don't know what Anand did. I'll tell you in a moment. But first, let me show you why you can't capture this h6 pawn, which at first glance seems completely undefended, right? If queen takes h6, aside from the fact that we'd be opening lines for the rook to attack the king, which is never good, the idea is that if queen takes h6, bishop to f8 comes, attacking the queen. The queen could retreat to h7, but then after knight to f6, the queen would have to fall back to h3, and then yes, this g4 would be a deadly threat because it would win the knight and also open these lines for the rook. You can check all these variations yourself on your physical board, which I highly recommend, as it will greatly improve your calculation and your understanding during games. Look at the move Anand played here. Rook to e1, an impressive move. Really, really good. Now, you might be wondering, is it possible to play this fork now? Well, no, this fork is extremely dangerous. If this advance is played now, queen takes h6 would actually be a very good idea, because even if this knight is given up, do you know what Anand's idea is with the queen here? To capture on e6 with the rook, in other words, to sacrifice it, and after pawn takes pawn, when the king moves away, the king would be captured, and both bishops would also come into play. And this would end in a checkmate attack. And that's why here, after thinking for quite a while, the black player made his move. Bishop to f8, which was a very good decision. It wouldn't have been a good idea to go into that kind of variation. Now, Anand said that he really liked this move a lot. It looks like a provocative move that doesn't threaten anything, but it's actually a very interesting move, and I'm going to show it to you right now. Queen to f5 puts itself in a position to be captured, but obviously it can't be taken because this pawn is completely pinned by the rook. It's true, yes, very nice. You can't capture the queen, but this queen doesn't threaten anything. So here, for example, black continues with this bishop to g7. The idea behind moving the queen from here is simply to be able to break through with h4. With the queen on h3, this pawn was stuck, and now with the queen here on f5, simply playing h4 is a fantastic move. Now you'll see why the genius wants to open up all these lines. The game continues with king to f8, a very clever move because now by moving the king out of the rook's pin, pawn takes queen is actually a threat, right? Therefore, here Anand brings the queen back to 8 straight. And you might say, isn't it a waste of time what Anand just did, bringing the queen to f5 and now returning it to h3? Well, no, because the big difference is this pawn that the queen managed to advance, and now it's creating tremendous tension on this g5 square. The game continues with rook to h8, which makes perfect sense, even though it looks like it's going back again, just like Anand did. The idea is that now, if the lines open up, the queen is being threatened. And this doesn't scare Anand, instead he captures here. Look, in the other video 2 days ago or so, I made the pawn takes pawn capture like this, and many of you in the comments didn't understand it. I get that all of you who've been around longer understand it perfectly, but for those who don't, let me explain. When you do a pawn takes pawn and pawn takes pawn capture, which would go like this, only the black pawn is left here, you see? If I make the capture like this, what I've really done is play out both moves at once, right? You see that it's exactly the same position, right? So here, simply, after pawn takes pawn and pawn takes pawn, it's the same position. I'm explaining this, okay? For all you who are just starting out, the queen is under threat. Where's this queen gonna go? Well, she simply moves to g4. You can't keep threatening because now this pawn here is under attack, so it has to be defended. But there isn't a good way to defend it. As you can see, look at how Anand is thinking through every move with an attacking mindset. But don't worry, the best part of the game hasn't happened yet. It's coming up now. Black counters on c5. You see that Anand is attacking on his left. Well, let's get this straight. Since I'm flipped around, I don't even know what I'm saying. Anand is attacking on his right, isn't he? And now the player with the black pieces also attacks on his right with c5, and the game continues like this. Bishop takes on g5, c takes d4, and now Anand, pay attention because he was calculating a ton of sacrifices here, realized that the best move is one that seems very simple, but you'll see, it's a deadly move. Rook from a to 1. See how finding the best move in a position often isn't complicated? Which piece do we still have left to play? That poor little rook that's still stuck at home, haven't even had breakfast yet, wants to join in and play with all the others too, right? So rook from a to d1 seems like a brilliant move, but this move hides too many, way too many possibilities that you're about to discover as we continue with this part. Bishop to b7, the last bishop develops, and here comes Anand's bombshell. The first bombshell of the game. Rook takes on e6. The whole rook is sacrificed. How do you feel about that, friends? When a whole rook is sacrificed, be careful. On this channel, we bring you some really spectacular games, but don't think this happens in every match. A whole rook is sacrificed for Elysium. Logically, you have to. You have to have everything very well planned out and make sure it all works, because otherwise you'll just end up down a rook and lose. Well, there's nothing better than accepting this sacrifice and capturing the rook. But it doesn't end here. Anand's idea now is to sacrifice the bishop. Don't tell me this doesn't blow your mind, especially those of you who are used to playing over-the-board tournaments. Seeing this kind of move is truly impressive. If you're playing in a tournament and your opponent does this to you, right in front of you on the board, you'd probably be stunned, right? Well, there's nothing better than capturing the bishop again, and now the queen comes in, taken on g7, giving shack and threatening the rook, but only if the king moves back, because then the rooks would be disconnected. It's so important, friends, to have your rooks connected. So after this queen capture, black is forced to bring the king toward the center, and that's why it was so important to get all the pieces into play. Look, Onid is down a full rook, a whole rook down, but he's going to make up for it by using all four pieces at once to attack. It's the only way for these kinds of sacrifices, which don't have a direct mate, to work, by bringing all the pieces in to participate. The game continues with knight takes pawn, so now there are a ton of threats here, including, for example, this check, which would already win the queen and leave a big enough advantage to win the game. And there are many other threats with discovered attacks from these two pieces along with the rook. Therefore, simply, the black player brings their queen to c5. The bishop comes in to sacrifice itself, in quotes, because maybe it wouldn't even be a good idea to capture that bishop, since if it's taken, a move like knight to b5 could follow, and it would end in checkmate with a double check, right? You can check it for yourselves. Therefore, here the black player, instead of capturing the bishop, brings the queen to e5. What's the problem with that? Logically, they sacrifice the queen, but it's not really sacrificing the queen. It's just that they realize it's the least bad move among all the bad options. It's the least bad one to keep holding on in the game. So how do you win the queen here? Simple, with queen to s3. Check with the rook, the king has to move, and when the king moves, the knight will be able to recapture the queen. The game continues with queen to e5, definitely the best move. Why? Because at least this way, they'll capture with the rook and be able to take a rook, right? And here Anand keeps up the pressure with the queen, queen to g3, and when the king moves, now comes rook takes queen, bishop takes rook, and now we reach a position where the material is pretty balanced because the queen is matched by the two rooks, but the advantage is just absolutely stunning. This king can't do absolutely anything, and Anand gives a masterclass to finish the game in just a few moves. First, he brings the queen to g5, giving check. The king escapes. Now the queen comes to f4 to give another check. The king seems to escape again, and it looks like there's no way to make progress. But here, Anand performs a positional exercise that could be really useful for all of you in your own games. He looks for which is black's best piece. When you don't know how to make progress, look for your opponent's best piece. Which one is it? It's that powerful bishop that's targeting every part of the board. How can I trade it off with this move? It's impossible for it to be safe, because if it moves away, then the rook gets captured. So here, black has no choice but to either trade or do something else and let the trade happen. In this case, the rook tried to get active, the knight came over here also trying to jump in, the rook tries to get active, and now Anand comes up with this spectacular tactic. Knight to g6 check, the bishop moves to d8, and the queen comes in with drastic consequences, right? She's threatening to come in here, also threatening the rook, discovered attacks with the knight, and to take the other rook. This is starting to get desperate now. Black tries to defend, and now look at this subtle and beautiful move. Bishop to d3. It looks like a totally normal move, right? In fact, it seems like a really bad move. Didn't you tell me, chess teacher, that this bishop wanted to trade itself for black's best piece? Yes. That really was the option, but what happened is that Anand saw even more attractive variations. Surely bishop takes bishop would have been a great move, but he found more appealing ones. The idea is that now black can't do anything. And what would you think if I told you that after this move, bishop to d3, black resigned? The threat is just brutal. There's nothing that can be done. Just so you understand, according to the engines, the best move for black here is bishop to c6. But surely it could end very quickly, for example, with knight to f8. It looks like the knight is being given away, right? But it can't be captured with the rook, because then the other rook would be taken, giving Anand even more material advantage, nor with the knight, because the rook would also be captured. And then, if the rook moves away, for example, if the rook comes over here, simply knight takes e6 with check. The king would have to move, for example, better over here, and now, simply, white could bring in this bishop, which is why it was so important to keep it, and as you can see, this will end in checkmate very soon. If you want, I can continue a couple more moves, like for example, queen to f4 giving check, so you can understand. And when the king moves, the knight comes in, the king will have to go back here, we capture the rook with check, and at this point, it's really better not to drag it out. So, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of game, which really lets us glimpse the true power of chess. These players really seem like they're playing a different game, don't they? And if you liked it, leave a big like, because that way I'll bring you many more games like this one. Honestly, there are a ton of games this fun. You already know that if you also want to practice with this style of chess set, I always recommend the website I leave in the description, since for me it's the most reliable of all, both in terms of shipping, because it only takes 2 days. You'll have it at your home in 2 days. And of course, for the quality of the chess sets, which is obviously number one. Also, for those of you who can't pay all at once, it lets you pay for the chess set in installments and with no interest. So for me, luckily, since I can choose, I go with this one, and that's why I'm sharing it with all of you. Don't forget to use the discount code CHESSTEACHER to get the chess set at a better price. I hope you really enjoyed this game. We'll see each other tomorrow, as always, friends, in the next one. Goodbye.